Well, should we get going, Daniel?
Yeah, I think it's time.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to talk about operationalizing sustainability, and as we all know, it is no trivial pursuit. This is a follow-on to the white paper that we provided at the beginning of Green Biz last year. And so what we want to do is take you through a little bit deeper into some of the concepts that we shared in the white paper. And then ideally, we will have time at the end to answer any questions that you have about this. We're going to go through the 6 different steps that we talked about in the white paper, as we said, a little bit deeper. What you'll notice is that there's a lot more upfront in this discussion today, and that's because the planning and the concepts up front are really much more important as you work through your strategy. And so we're going to cover those in much more detail, and then you'll see that there is some discussion for the last 3 sections that we'll go through. And so we'll get started, and as people come in, this is all being recorded and will be sent to you. So if you missed anything at the beginning, you'll be able to replay it at your convenience after the session's over. So we'll get started with discovery and planning.
Tanis, do you want to, maybe we could just introduce ourselves really quick, maybe our roles?
Yeah, I know who I am at least most days, so I totally forgot that piece. Absolutely. So Tanis Marquette, I work with Woodard & Curran, and I lead the sustainability and ESG practice. And I'm here today with my colleague. And so thank you very much, Daniel, for reminding me of that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Windsor. I lead our community development practice, and I sort of fit into this discussion in a couple of ways. I'm bringing kind of a planning and stakeholder engagement lens, but also then on the back end, on the implementation, project implementation side, that might help move the needle on some of the tracking metrics. So, thank you. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, it's been a great day already, and apparently I've already lost myself in that day, and so I thank you for bringing me back to that. And so apparently what I really need to do is discover myself all over again. But as far as sustainability, operational and implementation planning, discovery is really that aspect that you do at the beginning as you're deciding, to implement your strategy for the first time, perhaps, or really looking to reinvent your strategy and restart, really trying to strive to understand really what the problem statement is, perhaps, or restate your goal another way.
And Tanis, when you think about defining the problem, is there a way to maybe restate that in a, I don't know, more simpler way that just helps kind of ground the discussion?
Absolutely. Sometimes it's really trying to understand, what is the why, what is the driver. And so if we go to the next slide, it's really about understanding, what is that why? What is the rationale behind that initial implementation? And there's a number of different reasons for why you may embark on a sustainability strategy, or why you might be reinvigorating that strategy. And that can be a number of different things, or it could be a combination of these things. And so it could be a mandate from the CEO, it could be because of investor inquiry, customer requests, it could be market drivers, it could be that you've got new or expanded initiatives that are taking your strategy in a new direction, or it could be new engagement, as Daniel had talked about earlier with his role, new engagement with the community. So it could be one of these or a combination of these. It's what is the why, what's driving your strategy. And so discovery is all about understanding that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate this because, from a planning lens, you don't want to do everything all at once, right? You want to find out what's your starting point, and it's important to know that there's different places to start, and then you have to right size that approach and that why for each thing. And these whys, they're not stagnant, right? They push and pull depending on where you are and where you're going.
Exactly. And sometimes you may want to start small or start in a specific area of the organization. You don't want to necessarily take on too much. So you don't necessarily have to boil the ocean. You may want to just start within one aspect of the strategy or one specific initiative. And so there's various different ways to implement your strategy. So discover what your why is, what's the driver, and what you're striving for. Absolutely. So discovery is the beginning, and then we go to planning.
Well, maybe while that pulls up, I can at least talk a little bit to the planning perspective here. So Tanis, I think if you're talking about the why or the goal as being the sort of destination, the planning piece is that roadmap, that sort of the framework that's going to get you there, the milestones, the approach, the appropriate sort of checkpoints when you're stopping, pulling over, making sure you're not going the wrong way, and it really allows to bring people along with you so that it's participatory and so that you get everybody swimming in the same direction. Not only are people believing in it and moving, in that direction, but then you get people championing it and it moving kind of in a cohesive manner.
Absolutely. And so there's a number of different steps that come into that planning activity and different ways that you can get them involved. And so you've got communication plans, the definition of what success even looks like for different departments and different activities. It may look very differently, and understanding what it even could look like to begin with. You may benchmark your organization against various different organizations or your industry. And so that may be a benchmark against the industry itself. It could be against peer companies or competitors. And you may want to do an exercise that's called materiality and understand really what's important, because that's what materiality is. It's a fancy word for really understanding what's material in a sustainability sense. What are the important topics and goals and initiatives that other organizations are undertaking, and then how do those apply to you? And then to your point, Daniel, how does that resonate within your organization so that you can get different teams, different organizations, different departments and functions all looking and working towards that same goal? And then how does that maturity and how does that look? So different functions and departments may be at different levels of understanding, different levels of maturity, and that may be how you determine what initiatives that you start working on first. And in order to understand that, you may go through an exercise called stakeholder mapping and analysis. And so there's various different types of analysis that you do as part of planning to understand your organization and set the tone for how you strategize and plan out the initial steps in your implementation phases. And then you can determine what initiatives make the most sense as you start your foray into sustainability. And so as part of that, we talked about understanding where that maturity is. And I've found working with different organizations that actually you can have a number of different activities go on in the organization, and some different teams have questionnaires come into the organization, and they may not realize the value of those interactions, and so they discount them. Or perhaps even they answer them and then send the questionnaires back to whomever have sent them into your organization. And so that opportunity for interaction, for that stakeholder engagement is lost. And so you can have organizations that are actually almost at a level 0, so because you've lost that value. And then you go through that process of engagement and using those interactions to your advantage, all the way up through to the highest level where you're now using those engagements to your competitive advantage. And different departments, different functions can be at different levels of maturity at different stages. And so it's great to understand where different functions and departments are in their maturity as you're thinking through where you want to move the organization in your strategy, and so that you're engaging with the right teams and the right departments at the right time, so that you are setting yourselves up for success as you move through the process. You don't want to take on an an organization or a department that's not ready to engage, because they're going to fail, and you may not get another first time opportunity to engage with them and move through your strategy because you failed, and they're going to shy away from engaging on sustainability because they failed the first time out of the gate. So understanding where you are as far as maturity is really an important step in the process.
Yeah, and Tanis, I think, we sort of thinking about the chutes and ladders metaphor, where you have to also just be wary of different chutes that might knock you down. I think this is a critical one, that kind of honest moment where you have to do a bit of self-reflection and honestly put yourself in the right level, so that as you're developing your roadmap to your why or to your goals, that you're scaling it appropriately, that you're not overshooting what you're committing to or what you're capable as far as capacity or skill sets, and you're really right sizing that solution based on your maturity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we may have a poll where you can take the opportunity to judge where you may be as an organization. So we'll give you a moment to do the poll and see where everybody is. And I think that's fair. I think it takes an awful lot of hard work to be able to get an organization across the board, to where we're at level 4 and 5. And it takes a lot of effort and education and commitment for organizations to consistently perform at those higher levels. It takes a lot of years. And there's so much new that's coming into sustainability. And so thank you for that. I think it's really reflective of where we all are, even those companies that have been doing this for a long time. And so there's a lot of tools out there that help us to improve the opportunity for this engagement. And these steps, and this is why we're spending so much time on this part of the white paper, because we often miss these steps. So stakeholder engagement internally as well as externally is often missed. And so on the left side, you see the different stakeholder engagement opportunities. And so we have the stakeholder groups that you want to monitor. And those are ones that have lower interest and lower influence. And so you still want to engage with those, but then maybe just monitor the communications that come back and forth with them. Try to keep them informed with general communications. The ones that have greater opportunity to influence, you want to continue to inform them and strive to have greater opportunity to influence them and maybe move them into the greater interest quadrant. And then along the bottom, you have the stakeholders that have less interest, and you want to be able to move those to greater influence, and so that you can move them to actively engage. And so there's opportunities to continue to move the stakeholders around the quadrant so that you can move those to actively engage and continue to involve them in different activities and get feedback from the different stakeholders. But each stakeholder has a different profile. And if we move over to the right side, we have a tendency to want to engage with our stakeholders who are the champions. And that's because they carry our message further and deeper into the organization, and they carry the opportunity for us to network across different departments and functions. And they have the fast followers who then carry their message even further into the organization. And we have to be careful to recognize that there are the saboteurs and the cynics out in the organization, and we have to communicate with those individuals early on and build trust and communication with them so that they get involved and that we can answer their concerns and build the opportunity to engage with them so that they become potentially the fence sitters and move into the fast follower and ideally become our champions. Because if we don't acknowledge that they exist in our organizations, then they will potentially create challenges for us out in the organization and create communication challenges for us and potentially cause opportunities for our initiatives and our programs to fail. And so we want to be able to work and build trust, and that takes time, that takes lots of communications, and that takes the time to be able to actively listen to our champions that are out in the organization. And oftentimes, as we're working through our initial communications and our initial strategies, we forget to map out our stakeholders. Look for who your champions are, but recognize that there are going to be people that are maybe not necessarily fully aligned with your strategy. And rather than shy away from those individuals, take that time early on to engage with them. And if you're reluctant to do that, try to work through circles of influence. So find the individuals that they will work with and find the individuals that you have in common with them and work through those individuals to build trust. And work your circles of influence to then carry those messages and work through your stakeholder engagement plan to build those opportunities. And often this step gets missed in a communication plan and a sustainability strategy, and it's very critical to have those early wins in the strategy and the planning.
Yeah, Tanis, this reminds me of just about every stakeholder engagement process that I've ever been through. And there's always that one person or that one group of people that are the loudest in the room, and they really do have the power to derail a process. And where we've been most successful is when we've acknowledged that we knew that there's going to be this opposition, and we had to understand, do the work to understand what's their problem, why are they trying to derail this process, and work with them and get in front and message ahead of time so that you can nip it fast and move them to the right so that they can be more of an advocate than somebody who's sabotaging.
Yeah. And they may have valid concerns, right? So we want to listen to them, we want to understand, and we want to be able to engage with them and have them part of the strategy. And if you can get those people on board, your strategy is going to be really successful because others will see that and they'll want to be part of the team as well. So it's an important step, and I see it missed more often than not. Absolutely. And so yes. And so communication plan, Sam, this is a fun little way to think through putting all of those ideas on paper and thinking them through. And the most important message here is something that we actually borrow from our marketing friends. And this is a creative way to remind us that when we are thinking through messaging, what we want to do is try to say things 7 times, 7 ways, so that we're just not repeating ourselves out into the organization, and over and over and over again, sending the same message. But try to say what you need to say and communicate with the different teams, through email, through posters, through peer-to-peer communications, through different methodologies, so that it resonates and becomes a part of the overall strategy, the overall communications plan, and so that people hear it and it resonates and it becomes part of an understanding. And then that way people have greater opportunity to hear the message in the way that they understand, in the way that they learn, and the way that is incorporated into their part of their daily functions and their activities. And this is a greater way for people to really understand the message as it comes to them, rather than hearing it the same way every day from the same person, the email blasts that come in that now nobody listens to, or it's the same poster that's on the wall every day that we walk past. And so by having multiple communications and various different media, there's a greater opportunity that the message will resonate and people will incorporate those thoughts and those different messages into their overall planning. And then the next thing that you'll see on the next slide is different ways that we reach different stakeholders. And so different messages and different cadences go to different stakeholders. So these are various different examples of timing, of types of engagements to different stakeholder groups and different purposes. And so Communications Plan SAM is a process of helping you to map that all out and make it more formal, but it forces you to follow that methodology and then incorporate the 7 times 7 ways. And then that allows you to ensure you've got a solid plan that then incorporates both pieces into your formal plan and allow that resonating message to get across to each of the different functions and teams in something that meets them where they are and allows it to resonate with them.
Yeah, I really love the importance put on the target audience profile, where you have to really understand who you're talking to and where they are, because your message, it could be the best message in the world, but if you're not getting them that information, how they receive it, it's a wasted effort. And so understanding not only, you know, how they get their information, but, you know, their makeup. Is it changing over geography? Is it changing over departments? Is it changing day of week? And making sure that that's all part of the planning, I think, is really critical.
Absolutely. And then coming out of discovery and planning, there's going to be a number of different outputs. We talked about some of the different analysis tools. And so you may have your different implementation plans, potentially some pilot initiatives, communications plan that we just talked about. You may do potentially a survey of current software or platforms to understand, you know, where can you extend, where do you have to look for new modules or applications, and then how do you define success and what's the return on investment, you know, preliminary understandings of what types of metrics, you know, would you maybe consider, what are the types of drivers that you might be looking at, kind of going back to the why. And I think that Daniel's done a really good job of framing that, you know, what's the driver, what's your why, and what does that look like, you know, and different analyses that might need to be done to kind of set that stage. And so coming out of discovery and planning, you may have some base frameworks that have kind of set that stage for you to understand where you might want to go.
Tanis, is this where gaps would be identified too? You know, if you're thinking about softwares and different metrics, but you might not have a skill set that's aligned there?
I think you're going to have some preliminary ones, and then as we go through the next couple of phases, you're going to start to formulate what that's going to look like, but you're going to have some initial thoughts. But you might not quite be there yet, but that's, I think, why you start doing the survey, to take an initial look at it, because you have some systems, but you may not quite know what you need just yet.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then I think that's exactly where this question goes, right? So as you're looking at what you have, you're going to start looking at what the frameworks are asking you to do. And so depending on what type of organization you are you driven by the investors? So are the investors looking for financially driven metrics? Are they looking for very specific requirements, perhaps driven by some of the new SEC requirements, which we know currently are in litigation, but at some point they'll come to fruition? Are they driven by the EU, because the EU now has some new requirements that are regulatory driven? Or perhaps are these being driven by your suppliers and your customers? So they have their own frameworks and requirements that are now, even though they're voluntary, because they're part of business drivers, they are in, de facto regulatory because it's part of a business. And in some cases, and I've had requirements are put into contracts. So it's no different than a regulatory requirement if it's in your contracts. Or perhaps it's entirely voluntary, and so companies are following the GRI voluntary standards that have been around for decades. And so those may be the indicators that are telling you what types of metrics that you want to collect. And so then the initial surveys that you've done may lay the foundation for what you're going to strive to implement. But you're still not quite sure what you entirely need, but you're beginning to formulate that. And so this is the beginning of discovery and framework design. And so through some of these activities, you'll begin to start to understand that. But these are some of the examples that can set that tone for you.
And how does that relate to public metrics and reporting? And then what's the sort of necessary consistency across the platforms?
So the publicly traded companies are standardizing around the IFRS. Most of the frameworks are being absorbed into IFRS over in Europe. They started in the US and have been absorbed there. TCFD, which was a standalone requirement, has also been absorbed there. CDP and Ecovitus remain separate, but the requirements that both of those have independently are also being absorbed in some fashion, again, into those. The SEC also has absorbed some of the requirements of the scenario analysis for climate into its requirements. And then most recently, the GRI has a memorandum of understanding. And then you'll see the CSRD in the middle there. They have their own double materiality requirements in Europe. And double materiality is similar but different than the other standards. And the requirement there is the impact that the company has on the environment and society, but then also the impact that society and environment has on the company, and that's considered to be double materiality. The others are the impact that is just on the society and the environment. And they're all very complex when you look at them and try and equate them to each other. But the IFRS is becoming the de facto standard on a global basis because it covers the accounting standards for almost every country worldwide. And the US will ultimately cover most of their requirements through the GAAP standards. They're nuanced, but very, very similar, even though they're different. And they will go through the SEC requirements at some point. The GAAP standards are similar, different, but very similar. And in the public space, there is also a standard that will be coming out in 2025. So municipalities and cities will also start reporting ESG standards, environment, social, and governance related standards in 2025. That they will all start being covered by similar standards. And so these organizations have all started to collaborate with each other to minimize the differences between each of them through different memorandums of understanding. So even though they're still different, they are all working together to minimize the differences between them.
Interesting, got it, thanks.
Yes. And so in initial implementation, as you've made your baseline, understood your stakeholders, worked with your different teams to understand where they are and the level of maturity and capability that they've got, you want to work through to develop some initial implementation requirements, projects, and metrics. And most important is to make those initial metrics meaningful and measurable. You don't have to have a lot of them unless you have a specific requirement or framework that you're striving for, because as we said, what's your why? If there's a specific driver that's requiring an implementation strategy of specific metrics, if it's more voluntary, again, meaningful and measurable, and develop those initial metrics. And then as you move through your initial implementation, there's a few other requirements that are really important. And we kind of alluded to those earlier. It's exceedingly important to celebrate those early wins. So we talked about finding champions and implementing projects with teams that were going to ideally be very successful because they were more mature and further along the maturity curve than perhaps some of the other functions or departments. And so when you get this recording later, these are two examples that I think you'll find very helpful to share with your teams. The first is a TED Talk that you can click on the name and access. And then for those of you that maybe are perhaps more data driven, the second one is a Harvard study that showcases and demonstrates that the small wins ultimately will snowball into big wins. When you share the successes, they build on each other, and people want to share in those wins and absorb that excitement, and the small wins will turn into big wins. And it's just and they grow on each other. And so it's really important to really think through the smaller projects and initiatives so that you can get those small wins and build upon each other, and your early initiatives will grow into big initiatives. So celebrate those small wins. And then the next thing that's important, sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was just gonna sort of elaborate there from a planning perspective. It's exactly what we do to also bring people along and kind of make bigger holistic change, but in manageable steps. And so again, thinking about participatory engagement and allowing people to come along the process and then become those champions. The small wins is a great way to move those stakeholders from one side to the other and really get, again, everybody swimming in the same direction without having to do big investment, big holistic wholesale change from the get-go.
Thank you for that. Exactly. And another way to also incorporate that in a small way is remember that sustainability is not its own silo. It's really doing what you already do great and adding into that. So it's building upon what you're already doing well. So this is an engineering process. This is the engineering stage gate process. And what you're doing is you're incorporating green engineering to what you already do well. And so at each step of the stage gate, you're incorporating the green engineering principles into what you already do well. And so you're adding in a few questions that you already have questions at each stage gate. So you already are doing a process. You incorporate just a few more questions into what you're already doing. And over a short period, now you've incorporated green engineering into your process. And so you've created a sustainability review where previously you were just doing an engineering review of a process. And as you work through different departments and different processes, you're expanding your sustainability practices, and you continue to do that so that it's not a silo, it's not a standalone process. And now you have a new capability across the organization or the department. Again, expanding on what you do. Daniel?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I love this idea that we're not asking people to change who they are fundamentally. Instead, we're asking them to just interject into their existing process and have it weave through so that it's a common language as you step through these gates. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's what we're already doing. We're just adding a new perspective into the thought process. And then after we've got the initial implementation, we kind of revisit this and reevaluate the strategy. We kind of take the learnings. I think, Daniel, listen, with this, we were talking about taking the learnings from what we've already got and revisit the strategy, the metrics, and the goals. And this is where we sit back and we balance those aspirations with reality. Where are we? And did we really look at our maturity and truly balance with where we are in actuality with where we really want to go and can go? And then, you know, we go into full implementation and recognize that sustainability is an evergreen effort. And so this is where we readjust and reevaluate and then rewrite our full implementation.
Yeah, Tanis, I guess I have a question here. You know, if you're an organization and you're taking that step back and looking at the data, looking at your matrix, seeing how it might not, you know, a particular category might not be lining up with your goals, like what does that pivot look like? How does that translate into, you know, actions or you know, levers you can pull one way or the other just to sort of get back on track?
Well, so think about this, right? We may have set targets that were, you know, too aspirational, or it may have taken, you know, too much capex in a time when the market's turning down, or you know, the trends are just going in a different direction. So in order for us as an organization to have confidence, and for the organization behind us to have confidence in the goals that we set, you know, that's a transparent conversation that we have with our teams and the stakeholders, and we reset the goals and transparently realign the team and look at the data and look where we're going and reevaluate where we are, reset the goals. And that's a collaboration, right? And transparent conversation, and we reset and go. And more organizations, if you set the goal and you change the goal without a conversation, without transparency, that's when the questions come. That's when the discredit comes. But if you transparently say, this is the goal we set with what we thought the intention was, and there's transparency, there's a you know, confirmation of what we did and what we strive to do, and even sometimes, you know, what we did wrong, you know, what we thought we, you know, were trying to do, that transparency goes a long way. And especially with the employees, you know, they want to be part of the opportunity to make change. And so this is the opportunity to make that reset. And sometimes there's you know, we partnered or we didn't partner, right? So now we have a partner and we can take it further. Now we have, you know, we restructured so we can take, you know, and work together differently. You know, there's lots of different changes you can make in the organization to be more agile. And I think that especially when you're honest about where you need to go, it is a challenge to make some of these changes, and decarbonization is not easy. I think that, you know, there was a time when people, you know, thought that they could just buy a bunch of offsets, and then they realized that some of the offsets weren't quite as solid as they had anticipated, right? So there was a lot of scrutiny in the market, and so there was a reevaluation, and companies started changing how they were using offsets, how they were working, you know, to meet those, and you know, you reset and you work harder, and I think people, you know, really, especially the employees, really value that opportunity to reset and to move forward, and you have to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great takeaway here, is that goals and you know, they're not necessarily set in stone, and as long as you're doing it appropriately, it's a conversation, and it's about doing the right thing and less about hitting a particular goal.
Sometimes the goals have to sunset, and you have to reevaluate. A lot of companies, when they're first starting, will start with intensity goals, and then as they mature, they'll move to absolutes, right? And so you can see that progression as companies mature. It is truly evergreen learning. And so, you have to continue to have the opportunity for diversity of skill sets and perspectives. And as the strategy and the organization matures in their learning and capability, you'll see that. You embrace the mindset of a learning organization, because it really is hard work. And prioritize those real world experiences and sharing. Work with your supply chain partners. Oftentimes, a lot of those partners have already gone through these hurdles, and so you can share those opportunities and learning. We started this whole webinar, and the white paper is aptly, titled, "It is no trivial pursuit." It's hard work. And it takes the entire organization to move the organization forward. So there will be challenges, but if you work and have a solid game plan, you will be successful. And I think that, like I said, that transparency in setbacks, because they happen, right? There's acquisitions that change the game plan. Sometimes leadership changes, and sometimes you can't meet the goal. And so, you have those opportunities to reset. And like I said, pick the right partner. I think that's a big piece of it, especially if you're a multinational organization. Working with partners in your supply chain in various different regions. Different regions have different levels of responsibility, different levels of acceptance of risk, different hot spots in different regions. So understanding, the different types of ESG or sustainability risk in different regions is important. So working with, pardon me, the right partner is also important with your strategy, and finding those in your supply chain and in the different regions is very helpful.
Yeah, I like to think about this as, just because we're focused on an internal operational change, your organization is part of a system. No matter what, you're not on an island. You're interacting with communities, you're interacting with partners, and together you have an impact. And so making sure that, again, everybody is on the same page, and the ins and outs of everything and how that changes over regions or over different layers of your organization. It's sort of key how it all comes together.
Absolutely. So in our organization, this is how we think of sustainability strategy. And if you look at this, it's very similar to the white paper and how strategy comes together. And so we hope you find it helpful. And on the next slide, although this is our internal way of thinking of sustainability and how we overlap, we thought that it may be helpful to you. As Daniel and I said at the beginning, we have very different disciplines, but they're all interconnected because sustainability is interconnected. And all of your different departments in your organizations have different responsibilities, but as it comes to sustainability, they're all interconnected, and they're all solutions to your why and your drivers. And so we hope that we provide you some insight as to how you can operationalize sustainability. And if any of you have any questions coming out of the discussions today, we hope that we have enough time left in the webinar to answer those for you today. See, this is what I thought we were starting with. That's what threw me off.
We still have about 10-15 minutes. Folks can enter questions into the chat. I have one here that is from a little bit further back in the presentation, but do you have any examples of successful engagement with detractors when you think about stakeholders?
I do. I had somebody early in my career that really wanted absolutely nothing to do with participating in the strategy. And I know it's going to sound really strange, but I took the time every morning to go out and quite honestly, all I did was hang out with him. Didn't talk about the strategy, didn't talk about anything we were working on, just hung out with him and really tried to understand what was his personal driver. You know, what was he working on? What was he focused on? Really trying to understand, you know, honestly, where was he at, right? What was driving him so that I could understand where exactly it was that I needed to meet him to be able to understand what was his driver. And eventually over about 3 weeks, I don't know what I did, but I think just taking that time to listen, to try and understand and build trust, that was all it took for the engagement to start and the questions to start and to be able to see a little bit from my view, to hear a little bit from his view. And that allowed us to have that conversation that started him to understand why I was working on the initiatives that I was working on. And then he would ask questions about, well, how does this apply to my job? And that opened the door. Now, was that individual ever fully on board? Probably not, but he was on board enough that he didn't create havoc. And really that was all that was necessary for me to be successful at that particular site. And I think that for me, that was the important part, is I needed that specific individual who was the most senior person at that site, that had the ability to influence every other person on every other shift, and potentially derail everything else that I was doing. And I think that, you know, I'm not an HR person. I can't tell you every solution. All I can tell you is what I had experienced myself. But that was what worked. I was able to build enough of a relationship and have enough trust and be able to, you know, show that I wasn't coming in to change his world. I wasn't coming in to make more work for him. I wasn't coming in, you know, to do anything but my job and ideally make us both successful together. And that seemed to work. And I think every individual is different. And so I hope that helps give you perhaps some idea.
Yeah, and Tanis, I think there's probably a parallel in some of the organizational work that you do and some of the community work that I do, where you get people who have been around a long time. They don't want to see change. They might be close to retirement, or they might be, you know, used to things a certain way. And so what we've done in the past is, you really need to get, again, ahead of that message and help them understand that, you know, maybe what got you here is not going to get you there. There's a progression to an organization, to a community, and there are new needs that need to be addressed. And there's an opportunity to do it productively and with everybody being honest to each other and working together and helping them understand how they can benefit and how they can partner, how they can mentor, and really create a sustainable future for next generation. And I think, again, understanding those pain points and trying to work with them, as you mentioned, is really the only way. You have to listen, you have to work with them, and it's get away from the adversarial approach.
Another good question. Any advice on balancing short-term innovation and wins with long-term strategy planning? How can you begin to create small successes without losing momentum or developing the bigger picture?
Exactly. And so I think one thing that will help is having the smaller term innovations and strategy pieces feed into the long-term innovation and bigger picture, right? So that they all ultimately feed into each other. And so they're all stepping stones into the bigger picture. And you might not always be able to do that, but if they can feed into each other, that's a piece of it. And I think that if you've got you know, different teams that can see those small wins and be a piece of it, the one part that I've done in kind of a parallel responsibility was that, you know, you kind of have to have money to invest it in innovation for the future. So some of those small projects and those small wins that you know you can take that investment money into the larger wins, and so those two parallel paths support the larger strategy, and that has worked in some cases. And so you know the bigger picture has to come in a long term, and so in order for the bigger picture to come to fruition, it also has to have smaller pieces that come to fruition along the way, right? You just can't have it sitting out there and patiently waiting for 5 years, because people are going to lose sight of it. So it also has to have small stepping stones that people can see coming to fruition along the way, so that they've got to be scaled in pieces as well. So it's almost like 3 component parts that come together over time.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if we talk about the why is the goal, the endpoint, and that planning is the roadmap to get you there, that framework that you're creating during the planning process really outlines those steps that you can, celebrate. And ideally, they're cumulative. And then when you add them all together, that's the big change at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, this one is about evergreen learning. Can you recommend some sources or resources for continuing to incorporate new skill sets?
So the UN has a number of different courses that you can take, and many of those are at no cost. Coursera, which I know I'm saying incorrectly, that's just a glitch that's in my head, but they also offer a number of different courses. Many of those are also free, and there's some that are paid from some of the best universities in the world on any sustainability topic that you might be interested in. Many of the universities also offer online courses on many subjects if you want to invest in some certificate programs. And then there's also a number of different academies. Earth Academy is one that I would recommend. There is a fee for that, but their programs are superior. They actually have one of the original trainers from GRI is now one of the CEOs, I think, for the Earth Academy. They do a very good job on the programs that they put together. So those are some very good sources of superb material that will definitely put a program together that would be supportive of an organization. And I've got a couple of different textbooks that have come out in recent months that are pretty good as well. If you're somebody that's into reading, if you email me, I can send you a list of a couple of books that are pretty good that have come out in the last couple of months as well. Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and the questions are wonderful. If you think of any more, feel free to reach out, and we look forward to webinars in the future with everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.